Game over. It is game over.
Game over, cancer. I'm Val Solomon, Director of Program Impact at Cannonball Kids Cancer Foundation.
And I'm Dana Nichols, Executive Director of CKC.
Game Over Cancer, a podcast dedicated to exploring conversations about pediatric cancer research, solutions, and inspiring family stories.
We're a nonprofit dedicated to creating innovative treatment options for kids fighting cancer and educating for change.
By creating a space for these conversations, we empower the community to take action and provide tangible hope.
Game over, cancer. Screw you, cancer. Today's episode is all about what we do at our core: fund innovative treatment. Innovation means first in children, novel, less toxic, and with a focus on increased quality of life. Our guest today is an incredible example of this.
That's right. Dr. Tanja Gruber's research is changing the landscape of infant ALL treatment, where for infant ALL, standard care of treatment results in event-free survival, topping out at less than 37% after 2 months of treatment. Dr. Gruber's work has raised that survival rate to more than 67% after just 3 weeks of treatment. Her CKC-funded clinical trial will raise that percentage even higher. Because we fund innovative research, we ensure better treatments for kids and reduce their side effects, increasing quality of life. So she is an amazing example of what we do, who we fund, but also I think you'll get a chance to really see her personality and her sweetness and her passion for the work that she does and the families that she cares for.
She's incredible, a woman in STEM, and we love her. But I think what's so amazing is to watch someone who really has forged their career path in a really difficult road, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we talk about the importance of funding young investigators so they stay in. And then when we see what happens when someone really stays in the field for a long time, when they're doing clinical trial and then a second clinical trial based off those results, we're able to see the impact people can have when they really are able to branch out and look into their research and seek out innovation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think one of the themes that we end up touching on in our conversation is just so important. Like you were saying, there's so many different times that a talented, innovative thinker can be forced or decide to step out of research within pediatric cancer. And then add on top of that, you know, when Dr. Gruber was forging her career, there were no female mentors. She has all male mentors that were working with her. And now you see, I think at least when we're going out and in our experience with our young investigator grants, a good majority of them are female investigators now. And we're starting to see more of those researchers in higher levels of leadership within their institutions. And it's just really exciting to see that nuanced level of care that they're able to provide, and just that there are mentors now for women in the field, and what great things can come of that.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing I think that's so wonderful is we've developed this really great relationship with Stanford, their foundation relations team, their researchers. And I think what's so—
Shout out to Lucille Packard Foundation.
We love the Lucille Packard Foundation. And when we see how far we can go when we have that length of time and can like strengthen that bond, I think that's what's really, really neat. So we talk a little bit about how, one grant application from Dr. Kamens, one of Dr. Gruber's mentees, has turned into her clinical trial application and grant, or coming onto our SAB, all these roles that we're able to fill, and that relationship being able to flourish as we're all able to get to know each other better.
It's really cool to kind of connect the science and what the researchers are doing and how we fit as funders, but then backing up from that, all the donors that participate and that give what they can to CKC funding those researchers, other foundations or the government funding coming in alongside of all of that, and really all of us working together. And it's just really cool to talk shop with Dr. Gruber.
Yeah. So take a listen. We know you're going to love her the way we do. She's incredible. We are excited about today's episode and our guest, who is an incredible researcher out at Stanford University. She has a BS in biochemistry and biology from the University of Washington, a joint MD and PhD from the University of Southern California, and after completing her pediatric internship, residency, and fellowship in hematology oncology at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, she joined St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital as a physician scientist. There, she established a lab research program studying high-risk pediatric leukemias, notably KMT2A rearranged disease, and acute megachiroblastic leukemia, AMKL, leading to significant discoveries in genomic landscape and fusion genes. Currently, she's the chief of pediatric hematology oncology, stem cell transplant, and regenerative medicine at Stanford University and leads efforts in childhood cancer treatment and serves as the director of the Bass Center for Childhood Cancer. In her spare time, how could there be any with that intro? She enjoys running, hiking, traveling, and renovating her home. She's also the 2023 recipient of the John Wesley Duncan Options for Infants Clinical Trial Grant through Cannonball Kids Cancer Center. And we are so excited to welcome Dr. Tanja Gruber. Hello.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
We had the greatest pleasure to come out and see you in the lab earlier this spring and be able to tour the lab, talk about all you're doing, and actually meet with John Wesley Duncan and his family at the lab, which was really, really special experience. So we're just really excited today to chat and with our podcast listeners, have everyone know all the brilliant work you and your team are doing and the work we're able to partner with you. So we thought, just easy peasy, we'll start with if you want to explain the TEENY-2 trial, which is what we're funding partially through the John Wesley Duncan Options Grant.
So the TEENY-2 study is a clinical trial for infants diagnosed with acute lymphoblastic leukemia. So it's patients that are diagnosed with leukemia at less than 1 year of age. And what the trial is looking at is it's incorporating a chemotherapy regimen that we first evaluated on the first TEENY trial and demonstrated it was superior at lowering the disease burden in patients compared to the standard of care. And with this trial, what we're doing is we're now incorporating a type of immunotherapy with essentially an antibody that recognizes the cancer cells and helps eliminate them, as well as a very new novel drug that targets the leukemia cells specifically. So we're pretty excited. It's the first trial to bring that targeted drug, which is called ziftomenib, into patients that are newly diagnosed. So we're ahead of the game in terms of the population. Normally, drugs are first evaluated in adults before they're brought to infants. And so we're pretty excited about it.
That's awesome. You know, in terms of a novel treatment that's really focused in on reducing toxicity for children going through cancer treatments. I mean, I think we were just so impressed to hear the success you had in TEENY-1 and, you know, the fine tuning you wanted to do in TEENY-2. And of course, it serves our mission of finding less toxic treatments for kids. And I just wanted to kind of make sure that our listeners can follow along as well, that a lot of what CKC does fund has something to do with immunotherapy or uses immunotherapy because it's one of the ways that scientists have been able to kind of kickstart the child's immune system. And so we're looking at ways where if there are chemotherapy drugs that are being used for treatment, that there's also something that we're introducing that can help the child's own immune system also fight the cancer cells at the same time. And so in terms of that part of our mission, I think TEENY-2 has really hit it out of the park. And, I think we were super excited to share, as Dana mentioned, when we were able to meet with the Duncans. And families, I think, are really excited to hear that there are treatment options that are trying to improve standard of care and that the load of toxic chemicals that are being used for their children.
Yeah, I mean, chemotherapy is very difficult. And in one respect, I'm very grateful for the chemotherapy regimens we have, which have done a fantastic job at helping to cure our patients. But at the same time, as you mentioned, there's a lot of side effects. And with immunotherapy, there are many different kinds, but in general, the side effects are fewer. And harnessing the immune system to recognize and kill cancer cells is a fantastic way to complement chemotherapy and allow you to use less of it, but still achieve the same result in terms of curing our patients. And in some cases, it's just more effective, hands down, than chemotherapy. So we definitely have patients that don't respond to chemo. And in those patients, immunotherapy has really changed the game and been a huge advance in the field, both not just in pediatric cancer, but in cancer across the board.
It's so interesting, too, to hear you talk about a drug that was first used in infants when we're so used to translating adult treatments to children. Can you tell us a little bit about how you were able to determine that that is a drug that should be tested for your patients?
So this is the first in class. We say first in class, meaning the first developed drug that actually targeted this particular malignancy was developed by an incredible researcher in Michigan, Yola Grambecka. And she was presenting her work at a meeting I was at several years ago, demonstrating what she did is essentially develop a small molecule that recognized a critical protein for this cancer and inhibited that protein. And she was showing that data and how effective it was. And, while there is a subset of adult patients that do have the particular protein that this is targeting that is required for the cancer, it's the majority of patients are children. And I said, this needs to be evaluated in children. And this particular compound was what normally happens in industry is it's essentially a company will go in and they'll obtain the rights for it and they'll develop the drug further. Yola is a researcher, right? So she's already moving on to identify new drugs. So this company, Cura Oncology, has developed the drug further, and I've been in talks with them since they did obtain the rights for this drug. And they have developed a fantastic compound and had done really nice preclinical work with the compound, and then also piloted it in relapsed adult patients with this particular mutation that's required for the cancer. And so after seeing such early data that was so promising, I reached out to them and I asked, would you be willing to look at this compound in newly diagnosed infants? And typically we would look in the relapse setting first. And so this is a company that's really passionate about curing patients and really put all of that aside and said, this is the population that needs our drug. This is why we developed this drug. And we want to bring it to the patients that need it the most. And that was different from the other companies, which also have their versions of targeting this particular protein. So we were really excited and thrilled that they wanted to work with us. And we, at this point, have been able to move very quickly. And so the drug will be used in our newly diagnosed infants before their relapse pediatric studies have opened, which they are in the process of opening as well.
Yeah, I know you mentioned that it can be sometimes hard to get permission or access to include the drug in your clinical trials, but excuse me, it's also a long process, right? So how, from the time that compound was discovered and proven to be effective to where you're able to offer it in a clinical trial is what? How many years?
A lot.
Yeah.
So when I think about the initial publication of the development of the compound, I believe was in 2012, and then demonstration that it was effective against these cancer cells was published in 2015. And that's when I became aware of Dr. Grambecka's work and started talking to her about it. And so if you think about that, that's a huge timeline.
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest challenges is how do we get new promising treatments into children as quickly as possible.
Right.
And that's, I think, always been a challenge. But, in the end, it's a marathon, right? So we have to play the long game and be persistent. And that's one of the things my mentor always told me is you just keep working at it and be persistent. And maybe it's not going to happen in the timeline which you want it to happen, but the end game is, treating patients and curing patients. And so you really want to keep your eye on that goal, and then all the hard work is worth it.
Yeah. I feel like we talk about that a whole lot too, in terms of funding research too, that it is a marathon. It takes a long time. It takes a big community to do it together.
It's so difficult because you're talking about something that is so horrific. And when you're on the granular level of every child or interacting with one child, we need a cure, we need something now. And that's all true. And at the same time, when you look at it globally, it takes so much work and so much time to get somewhere. So in some ways, they're kind of fighting against each other. And I think it takes a lot to stay in this field and on this path. I wondered if you wanted to talk a little bit about even choosing the path of pediatric oncology or, and then on top of that, as a physician scientist, I mean, kind of choosing to take on the problem from a lot of different angles.
Yeah, I don't have a family history of physicians. A lot of people come from families where people go into medicine and it's somewhat expected, and that wasn't the case with me. My parents were both immigrants to the U.S., and I was essentially raised to go into a professional field. And my father always said to me, "You can be a lawyer, you can be a doctor, or you can go to business school." And
the options are endless.
And I couldn't fathom being a lawyer or going to business school. But fortunately, once I entered school, I actually loved science. I love science. I loved medicine during my courses. And I really actually, at one point during my college years, struggled with the decision of, should I go to graduate school or should I go to medical school? And one of my teaching assistants at the time was doing a combined MD PhD degree. And she said, "Oh, this is what you should do," after asking me a few questions. And I had this sort of grandiose vision of working on something in the lab and bringing it to patients. And I said, "But that's not really realistic." And she said, "It is realistic. And this is what you should do. And this is the path you should take." And so I took it, and I don't think I fully comprehended the time commitment, the number of years that I would be embarking upon. And then there was one point during my PhD when I thought, "Oh, I'm never going to graduate." But you do, and time goes quickly. And then in the end, when I look back on it, I'm so grateful for her for recommending this course to me, because this is really where I love to be. I really love the intersection of science and medicine. And when a patient comes to you and is not responding to treatments, maybe you're not able to cure that particular patient, but it really drives you forward and helps you focus on what questions to ask in the research setting, with a goal of ultimately not having that same scenario present itself again. And that was how I got interested in infant leukemia. I was a fellow, and a patient presented who was less than a year of age. And my clinical mentor, Paul Gaiman, said to me, "Oh, unfortunately, children diagnosed at less than 1 year of age have a terrible prognosis." And I was like, how could that be? How could the difference between, 360 days of age versus, 380, how could that make a difference in outcome? And that's really when I started studying it and trying to understand it and learning about the disease and the particular mutations that are driving this disease and why it's so bad, and really got me along that line. And initially, I really planned on really focusing on my research in the laboratory, and turning to clinical trials was something that I didn't expect to happen. But at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, it's really set up to make running and establishing clinical trials very feasible for somebody like me who is trying to balance clinical care in a research laboratory. And so, if I'm working on something in the laboratory that has promise, why not evaluate that in the clinical setting?
Right.
Who's telling me I can't?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was really where the first trial began, where I was essentially looking to see if the results I saw in my lab would be effective in the clinical setting. And that's actually pretty scary. I remember the first patient that we treated, it was a huge responsibility because this family was trusting in me to try a regimen that hadn't been evaluated yet. And, you want the best for your patient. At that point, your research becomes secondary, right?
Mm-hmm.
The patient becomes the focus, and all you want is for them to be cured.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a little bit scary the first time. And then once patients started doing well, you become more and more comfortable. And then it reaches a point where you realize that this was the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then there came a time where we were discussing, should there be a second teeny study? And uniformly, all of the co-investigators said, absolutely. And that was really validating and gratifying for me as a researcher.
I remember when we first met you that you were talking about the success of Teeny One and how parents and the community of people who were aware of the first trial were really pushing for a second one as well. Not just those who were working on it, but people who actually benefited from it. And I thought that was such a beautiful thing for people to say,
Mm-hmm.
This is valid. This is what we need. This is the type of research that families want too. It really spoke to our mission as well, being an organization that was inspired by a family story, and where the quality of life for the children being treated is so important.
Mm-hmm.
It was really, really cool to hear that from a researcher too. There's a lot that I feel like we vibed on that first time we met, which, speaking of mentorship, we met because we were funding one of your mentees for our Young Investigator grant, Dr. Jen Kamens. And that's where we met you. And then that was the first time I remember being like, wow, this is a really, amazing, rigorous, but also the people here are wonderful. So tell us a little bit about, the path of mentorship and what that looks like for you.
Yeah. So Dr. Kamens was a clinical fellow when I was still at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And I was attending on the leukemia service, and she was the fellow on service. And I asked her what she was interested in doing. And she said, I want to do what you do. I want to, do research in the laboratory and bring it to patients. And I said, okay, well then do it. And, not very many people have the sort of the drive to play this long game that we, referenced earlier. It's a lot of hard work. But she definitely has that drive. She has that passion. And since I first met her, she has really worked tirelessly. So she initiated a project in my group. She drove that project. She did all the preclinical work. She developed a clinical trial based on it that's now open and also supported. She's supported by Chemball. And so that's been incredibly gratifying to me, because she is achieving something that it took me years as a faculty member to achieve. And so I think as a mentor, really what your job is to help support junior investigators in reaching their goals. And sometimes that goal is very ambitious, like Dr. Kamens, and sometimes it's not as ambitious, but you're really there to support them and help them achieve their goals, help them follow the path that they want to follow, and support them as much as you can, whether it be through identifying opportunities, recommendations, it's just really gratifying to see somebody happy and doing what it is that they want to do. And I wouldn't be here without fantastic mentorship. And I think back to my mentors and how they made it possible for me to succeed. And really, it's about giving back and doing the same thing for others. So it feels pretty great to see how much she's done in such a short period of time, although she probably feels like it's a long time.
Right.
But it's really a fantastic feeling. And, it's like having a kid, your son or daughter, and watching them succeed. It's the same. It's really, in my opinion, the same.
That's so awesome. We, our Young Investigator Grant, we're so proud of that program and being able to, begin the journey of the long game, right? In some sense. And then I think we've noticed and been sitting in rooms with different teams lately and seen a shift where, for us, a large majority of our YI applicants are women now. And I just wondered if you wanted to speak to that and kind of establishing a career in a male-dominated field, or being able to see and mentor women now, if that is a shift, or if you have any thoughts on that.
I think it's definitely a shift. All of my mentors were men, and growing up in the system, leadership was dominated by men, and when you think about the women that are going into medicine and the number that are graduating, I was sitting at a dinner, at a recruitment dinner at Memorial Sloan Kettering, and they were trying to recruit me to lead their leukemia program. And I was sitting there, and I was the only female at that table. And I said, where are all the women? And they all kind of laughed uncomfortably.
Right. What women?
And one of the guys said, oh, well, Tanja, not to worry. There's tons of women in pediatric oncology, and they're just not at the table right now. And made some reference to some small minority percentage. And I said, but, more than half of women graduating, or more than half of people graduating from medical school are women. And if you look at the world of pediatrics, it's dominated by women. So where are they? Mm-hmm. And I think we're reaching a point where, when you have that number of people, the talent is there. And it's almost impossible not to see that talent rise. And all of a sudden, we're reaching a point where division chiefs are women, where researchers that are leading efforts are women. And I think we're really good at it. I think we should have been there for much longer. And I think it's also, as more and more women become investigators and are put in leadership positions, it really provides a great example for women coming through the system to see that I can achieve these goals, and it's not out of the scope, and making that very, very real for people, and realistic, and able to achieve these things. And, I think women are incredible physicians. They're incredible researchers. You sometimes hear, oh, so-and-so is so critical. That's one of the best traits to have as a researcher. So I just think that the idea that that men are somehow better physician scientists, it's just not accurate. And it's just a matter of empowering women and showing them that they can do it, and then stepping back and watching them succeed. And it is so much better, in my opinion, now when I go to meetings and I see all of the women and all of the leaders that are female. I think the field is going in the right direction, and I think there's a lot of promise and opportunity in the future.
There's so something that we've been speaking about, that the theme that comes up a lot on this podcast is, when you want to do better for children and you have a passion to help children fighting pediatric cancer and stepping forward with your authentic self, there's the part where you have to, decide, I'm ready to do this. I have the time to do this. The critical evaluation of putting yourself forward for it, and leading by example. And I kind of wanted to bring that into our mentorship topic because, in addition to all that you're doing to at the hospital and also mentoring the next generation of scientists, you've also stepped forward and volunteered to be on our scientific advisory board. And that's another way that a lot of our researchers, or the relationships that we have with our researchers, kind of deepens, is through service on our scientific advisory board. So if I can for a moment, I'd like to just talk a little bit about what that is for our listeners. So we are not scientists, as you can tell. Dana and I are not scientists. We can follow along, but in terms of discerning the science, that's not our game. So we have an advisory board of physician scientists so this is what they do. They write their own research, they do their own grants, but they can also critically evaluate grant opportunities that we bring to the table as well. So we have 8 volunteer members of our scientific advisory board. Dr. Gruber is one of them. Who brings their expertise and their understanding to our grants process to evaluate all of our applicants and make sure that the scientific rigor is there, so that when we take out the recommendations of the SAB to our board, we know that the science has been approved and debated and discussed and evaluated. And Dr. Gruber, I just sort of as a personal side note too, I remember very distinctly after we met you, Jason, who's on your foundation, messaging us and saying, hey, listen, Dr. Gruber, Tanja, he says Tanja. Tanja said, she would love to, number one, she has a clinical trial she'd like to run by you guys, but also she basically said, whatever they need, let me know, I'm in. And so we said, how about an SAB member? And so then you joined. And so number one, thank you for saying yes to that. But can you also talk, I guess my question's a couple different things. One, about the time commitment and what does it cost, I guess, our researchers to step forward and be in the SAB in that way? Because I think it's important for our listeners to know all of the background work that goes into it. And then part 2 is, not to be like, tell us why we're so great, but what was it that said, I want to help them? What was it that made you say, like, not only is this important, but I want to help in this manner?
Yeah, it's honestly a privilege to be on the SAB because you're given the opportunity to look at grants and then recommend what you think is promising, and in that way shape how money is directed by the foundation. So that's honestly an incredible honor for me. I really enjoy the process of looking at the exciting research that is coming forward. And it first of all, it makes me a better researcher. And secondly, you really get to see the best and the brightest from a perspective of looking at the Young Investigator Awards. So you guys have your Young Investigator Awards, and then you have your awards for clinical trials. And I think, to me, that's why supporting the foundation was so important, because investigator-initiated clinical trials are very difficult to get funding for. And that focus really spoke to me, because you're allowing trials to actually happen and get off the ground, whereas in the absence of funding, many times it wouldn't happen. And so that has a huge impact on patients and really can change the game in terms of the treatment that they get. So I think that's an incredible mission to have, and that really spoke to me, supporting young people and then also supporting clinical trials. And I think it's our duty to give back. For every grant that I have received, I'm very, very grateful. And this is an opportunity for me to give back to the community and hopefully help identify promising investigators to fund. And it does take quite a bit of work. It obviously depends on how many applications there are. But I always like to, I'm assigned, 5, 6, I can't recall, a handful of grants. And I like to read them all, just a run through. And then I go back and look at them in detail. I do a lot of actually searching online for publications to look at what's being supported, how novel is this. So I do a lot of background research on the grants I'm reviewing, as opposed to taking things for face value. And then I also like to essentially jot down thoughts and then go through systematically before I give them a score. And I think importantly, give thoughtful feedback. Sometimes you have the opportunity to get feedback when you apply for grants and you don't receive them, and that feedback can help you improve. So I think when I do give feedback in terms of things that could be improved, I try and be thoughtful about it, not nitpicky, but really conceptually, this is what I think would benefit the grant tremendously, because ultimately you want people to succeed. I'm not there to shoot down grants, right? Some people see it as, what can I find wrong in the grant? And for me, it's what is great about this grant, and are there opportunities to make it even better?
It's fantastic. And I will tell you, being on the side of, we spend a lot of time, especially the first quarter of the year, really working our contacts and trying to make sure people are aware of our application process and really recruit as many grant applications as we can. One of the things that when we're meeting with potential researchers or even with the foundation folks at different institutions, when we say that our SAB will offer comments, that we'll share comments, especially for those young investigators where this might be their first or second or even third crack at writing a grant, it is so valuable. We always get such a positive response when I say, it's not for our purposes, it's for the purpose of making sure that everybody writing a grant improves. And so I can't tell you how grateful we are and how grateful our applicants are that you do that, because everybody who comes in contact with our process is improved or funded because of that. And so I just think it adds value to be a part of our mission, no matter which side you're looking at it from.
Yeah, I think what's beautiful, whether it's the applicants or the review of the SAB, is how thoughtful everyone is and taking their time in what you're doing. And I think there's no world where anyone I've come across that we get to work with as researchers is just here because it's a job and we're doing it. But when you're taking extra time for something, we think about that a lot, even from our grant process perspective, is like, we're asking them to do this. We're asking someone to come be on the SAB. How can we make sure we're doing this in a way that's respectful of your already overloaded schedule? How can we be respectful to people we're asking to write a grant application when we know this is, not truly, it's a priority because they need the funding to make it happen, but it's not the priority of what they're trying to do to actually solve this problem. And so I love hearing about, you saying even I take this time to see what's great and what's right in the grant, because I feel like that is a piece that everyone's bringing to the table in our mission of just how can we, be most supportive of each piece of this puzzle, which is a really complex puzzle.
And the other thing I'll add is, one of my colleagues who's chief of neurosurgery here at Stanford, he was talking to junior investigators, and he said, my first year as a faculty member, I applied for 100 grants and I got one.
Oh my God.
And I was like, what a great thing to say to these people.
Yeah. Here's the reality.
Years later, he's chief of neurosurgery, has all this funding. He's incredibly successful. And I thought that was just the most fantastic thing he could have said, because, your rejection today, if you incorporate feedback and improve on it, can be the accepted grant of tomorrow. And that this is constantly a work in process. And when your grant's reviewed and you don't necessarily get funded, but you have comments and you're able to improve it, you're improving the science, you're improving the clinical trial, you're really improving the process. And so just keep focusing, and next year you may get that Cannonball grant. And I bet you definitely have had people that have applied multiple years before they received it. And that actually makes receiving it all the better.
Yeah. We actually had one of those then speak at our gala and help us raise money for the next researcher too. So that's great.
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes when we talk about this being a long game, I mean, for us and why communication with our researchers and the foundations at your institutions is important is until we are overflowing with money for every single grant application we receive, we're having to make difficult choices some years on these are all great projects. But we know that this one is a little bit further ahead in the sense it's going to move forward. There are going to be children enrolling quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes our feedback is even, hey, we think this is great and you should apply next year. Like that a no really isn't a no. It's a timing and a not now potentially because it is such a long game. And with the limited resources we have at times, we're choosing who is going to be able to create those options for kids most quickly in a not quick at all scenario.
Yeah. Yeah, in the great scheme of the slow-moving process that fighting cancer really is, how do we move our piece forward as quickly as possible? Yeah.
Well, we're so grateful for you taking time to speak with us. We love hearing about everything you're doing. We love everyone at the Lucille Packard Foundation over at Stanford. Your whole team is incredible. And I think we have found there's just a really great click in energy in what you're all doing and what we're doing. So we're so grateful. I want to remind our listeners that if they want to support the research we're doing, they can make a gift on our website, cannonballkidscancer.org. But also, if you're listening and you know of a researcher who is looking for funding for their incredibly innovative work, they can also go to our website, cannonballkidscancer.org. There is an apply for a grant section, and it will give you all the information you need about our deadlines, our roll of calendar, how everything works, so that you can understand how you can move this fight forward.
So if you're ready to be a part of Team CKC and join us in Educating for Change, please share, like, and subscribe.
Thank you for tuning in. We know it takes so much to face our difficult topic head on, but we appreciate you joining us and making a commitment to our fight against the status quo of pediatric cancer. I'm Dana Nichols.
And I'm Val Solomon.
And until next time, bye.
Join us as we transform fear into courage and turn adversity into opportunities for change.
If you want to be involved in the conversations that create change in the world of pediatric cancer, take a moment, share, like, and subscribe.